President Cyril Ramaphosa says South Africa's latest application to the International Criminal Court is to prevent further deaths through starvation and famine in Gaza. Pretoria wrote a third letter to the ICJ this week asking the court to intervene immediately as Israel has allegedly violated its last order to stop the killings. According to the President and the latest reports by the United Nations, Israel is allegedly blocking aid, in particular food and water, to Gaza as a tactic of war. The UN says children are in mortal danger and at least 20 have died from starvation so far this week. Earlier this week, the World Food Programme also confirmed that it was battling to get its trucks into Gaza. President Ramaphosa now hopes the country's latest request to the ICJ to intervene will come in time to save lives.
Starvation, which many organizations have been warning about, has now arrived. People in Gaza are now starving. There is no food, there is no usual facilities like water, and people are dying, and especially young children are dying as a result of having no food. People have no food in their homes, and that is why as delivery vans or trucks come, there's a scurrying for food, and which is a natural reaction. So our action is aimed at also addressing that, because the people of Palestine are really suffering. In Gaza, the suffering is beyond human contemplation or understanding.
Meanwhile, Gaza ceasefire talks have hit a snag yet again, with the humanitarian crisis worsening. Responding to proposals from Egyptian and Qatari mediators, Hamas says there will be no exchange of prisoners before a permanent ceasefire and a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. For more on this, we're joined this afternoon by Daniel Levy, who is president of the U.S. Middle East Project. He is also a former Israeli peace negotiator. Daniel, it's good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. And there are several developing and moving parts to the story that we'd like to get your analysis on. Shall we talk about how negotiations can possibly take place when Israel is not at the negotiating table?
Well, indeed. The question here, I think, in the negotiations is whether there will be leverage, and that leverage certainly exists, on Israel, so that it comes round to a position which enables a ceasefire, which enables the humanitarian assistance to go in at the level needed, which enables Palestinians to stop being in these horrendous conditions, not only those facing direct Israeli military strikes, but now the knock-on effects of this ongoing military action, as we've just heard from your correspondent, the starvation, the disease, the inability of people to receive basic medical treatment, drinkable water, food, etc. But also, these talks are the only way to get the Israeli hostages out. And here's where it's a debate inside Israel. Does the Prime Minister even care? Forget about whether he cares about the Palestinians. We have the answer there. But does he care about his own people, the Israelis being held in Gaza? The talks are apparently stuck because there is a position on the table that could lead to a deal. But the Americans are unwilling to have a reality where it looks as if Hamas is the reasonable party and Israel is the rejectionist party, and the US is not willing to use the leverage it has on Israel. So instead, we are absolutely stuck, and Palestinians in Gaza will continue to live in this hellscape. And let's be clear, Israelis will not be secure if they continue down this road.
It's a funny thing. We have been steering clear, and when we say we talk about the likes of countries like the US, steering clear of the word ceasefire for such a long time. And now that it is here, President Joe Biden was caught on camera with an ice cream cone in his hand some weeks ago, talking about, hoping that in the next few days these talks would get underway. And his latest comments now do paint a picture of Hamas being the stumbling block in reaching this ceasefire agreement. So someone's got to make a move here, right? Someone's got to say something. that's going to give hope to the prisoners who are still being held hostage in Gaza, the Israeli prisoners, and who's going to bring some life-saving aid and relief to people in Gaza. Let's not forget that Ramadan is not too far off.
Just days away, of course. We've all had a happiness high from ice cream, but I don't think the American president can really use that as an excuse for the appalling policy that the U.S. has pursued here. And I don't want to take blame away from Hamas for their original action. I don't want to take blame away from Israel for the years of occupation. And I think we now have strong cases in court that this constitutes a legal regime of apartheid that Israel has been conducting, and certainly not for its subsequent actions in collectively punishing and devastating the civilian population of Gaza. But there is a party that is providing the weapons. And it is almost beyond one's ability to comprehend a situation in which the US, and there are reports today in the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal which go into great detail of the amount of weaponry and the circuitous routes that the American administration is taking to maintain zero transparency and to not even go to Congress to be open and transparent and accountable for the weapons it is sending. And here you have the US sending the weapons that are causing the devastation and then airdropping small parcels of food to make up for just a tiny fraction of the killing and the devastation that American weapons are causing. Is it madness? Is it incoherence? Is it deep cynicism? I don't know, but it's certainly not doing America's reputation any good as an upholder of international law. It's not helping Palestinians. It's not going to bring stability to a region which is still on the precipice of a much wider conflagration. We see what's happening with the Houthi reaction in the Red Sea to international shipping. We see still the prospect of a metastasizing of this conflict with Lebanon and South Africa. And I have to say this because it's important that it's acknowledged from the outside. South Africa is doing the best it can, and more than virtually anyone else, by going back to the International Court of Justice again to ask for additional rulings on provisional measures. I think it will be harder this time for the court to ignore that. Doesn't mean it will come to an end, but I think, again, it will focus minds. It will make it more difficult for those external parties to sustain support for what is now a plausible contravention of the Genocide Convention being committed.
Yeah, it now is, and it has been for some time, hasn't it, Daniel?
Absolutely.
Since October.
Absolutely.
Since October 7. And as you say, at no point in this discussion do any of us condone what happened on October 7. And, you know, critics of the U.S. will say whatever the U.S.'s stance is on critical issues of global peace and security, the right move is to do exactly the opposite of what the U.S. is doing, just given its track record over the past while, particularly perhaps on Israel and on Gaza. So Daniel, does the Prime Minister care about the hostages being held, the Israeli Prime Minister, about the hostages being held in Gaza? You asked the question earlier. How do we make sense of that in a context where Benjamin Netanyahu has said time and time again that the civilian casualties in Gaza is not the aim of what Israel has done in the Palestinian enclave, but it is part of the mission of that country to destroy Hamas. How do we make sense of those two things?
If I kept smashing you on the head with a hammer, which I will not do, and I said my aim is really to get the fly that I see just buzzing above your head, I don't think it would be very credible on the 10th hammer blow or even the 5th hammer blow. The idea that Israel, should be allowed to conduct this indiscriminate collective punishment of Palestinian civilians is in contravention of international law. The idea, that this is an achievable thing, total victory against a movement, but also against an idea. The idea that people who are kept under conditions of oppression, brutality, structural violence, and apartheid do not have the right to resist within international law. But the idea that this can be defeated is not serious. And you started with this, and it's not just me questioning does the Israeli Prime Minister care about the Israelis being held in Gaza? But you see the families of those who are being held out on the streets, marching in Israel, howling at their government. Why are you not prioritizing this? I think many in the country, and we see and hear this, believe that this Prime Minister is a man who faces a very hard political challenge if and when the war ends. He is also a man in court on corruption allegations. And the war is his ticket to staying out of jail, quite literally, and staying in power. But the fact that you cannot bring this guy to heel when he is dependent on external support, the US vetoes at the Security Council, ignores the International Court of Justice and supplies the weapons, he can be brought to heel. It's a political decision, and it's a question of political will. And President Biden may well pay at the ballot box and be denied a second term for his support for the criminal activity of Israel.
So 30,000 people have been killed in Gaza so far. 20 people have died. 20 children have died of starvation. They are in mortal danger, so says the U.S. What's it going to take, Daniel? What is it going to take?
You know, it's hard to wrap one's head around and comprehend and digest the scale of suffering. And I think the tale that this will have in terms of how this was handled will cast a blight over Israel, over the US, over everyone who has indulged this activity. By the way, I think what South Africa has done will go down as being a courageous act. What will it take? I don't say that I'm ready to give in to hopelessness and despair, because you never know what that tipping point is. When someone attends a protest, makes a decision as a consumer to boycott a certain product, when the US hears again and again in its international dealings that this is killing your ability to have credibility, when the ICJ makes another ruling, you don't know what that moment where the equation and the calculation just tips over the other edge. So, I would counsel to myself and to everyone else not to despair. We have to keep trying.
Daniel Levy, president of the U.S. Middle East Project. He's also a former Israeli peace negotiator. Thanks for talking to us this afternoon.